They called her dead weight at the firm, until the billionaire they stole from asked her one question. Nobody noticed Evelyn Hayes. That was exactly how she liked it. At 9:17 on a rain-soaked Tuesday morning, billionaire investor Vincent Moretti walked into Summit Harbor Holdings, placed a black pistol on Evelyn's desk, and asked where his $36 million had gone. The entire accounting department stopped breathing. Phones stopped ringing. Keyboards froze mid-email. Even the ancient printer near the break room chose that exact moment to stop making noise. For 5 years, Evelyn had been invisible. She sat in cubicle 47. Gray cardigan. Cheap glasses. Hair always tied back. Lunch always eaten alone. People called her Spreadsheet Barbie when they were being nice. Most days they called her dead weight. She always heard them. The jokes. The whispers. The comments about her weight. Her clothes. Her awkward silence. They thought she was stupid. The truth was far more dangerous. Evelyn wasn't stupid. She was watching. Every invoice. Every transfer. Every fake vendor. Every offshore account. For 5 years she had quietly collected evidence against nearly everyone in the building. Not because she planned to use it. Because numbers bothered her when they lied. And Summit Harbor Holdings was built entirely on lies. Vincent Moretti stood over her desk. 40 years old. Worth billions. Feared by people who pretended not to fear anyone. The newspapers called him a real estate magnate. Federal investigators called him untouchable. Chicago called him something simpler. The man you never stole from twice. Behind him stood 2 men in black suits. Neither smiled. Neither blinked. Neither looked particularly interested in human life. Richard Kane arrived seconds later. Senior partner. Evelyn's boss. The man responsible for making her life miserable since her first day. His expensive suit was already soaked with sweat. "Mr. Moretti," Richard stammered. "There's no need for this." Vincent ignored him. His eyes remained fixed on Evelyn. "Miss Hayes." Her fingers rested lightly on her keyboard. She looked up through thick lenses. "Yes. My money." His voice was calm, which somehow made it worse. "Where is it?" Around them 40 employees watched. Waiting. Hoping. Praying the weird woman from cubicle 47 would become the sacrifice. Richard laughed nervously. "She wouldn't know. She enters data." Vincent's eyes never left Evelyn. "That's interesting." Nobody spoke. Vincent leaned closer. "When I said $36 million disappeared, everyone else looked terrified." His gaze swept the room, then returned to her. "Except you." Evelyn adjusted her glasses. "What does that mean?" "It means everyone else is afraid of being caught." The room became silent. Richard's face turned white. Vincent smiled. "Small. Dangerous. And you're the only person here who already knows where the bodies are buried." For the first time in 5 years, Evelyn smiled back. And Richard Kane suddenly realized the biggest mistake he had ever made wasn't stealing $36 million. It was spending 5 years teaching the smartest woman in the company exactly how the fraud worked. For 5 years, Evelyn Hayes had been the office invisible woman. At Summit Harbor Holdings, she was a junior accountant, the one nobody noticed until mistakes appeared on their spreadsheets. Her gray cardigans, thick glasses, and timid demeanor made her the perfect target for office gossip, casual cruelty, and patronizing advice. They called her dead weight. They whispered behind her back, assumed she couldn't comprehend basic financial logic, laughed at the way her chair squeaked, and mocked her nervous habits. She had learned every nickname, every joke, every slight. She always heard them, and she always remembered. Evelyn didn't fight back, at least not openly. That was her secret. While everyone else performed for the bosses, panicked when the numbers didn't align, she was quiet, precise, and calculating. She memorized every transfer, traced every routing number, and documented every misdirection. Spreadsheet after spreadsheet became a record of both incompetence and corruption, quietly exposing every weak link. By Wednesday, Evelyn had compiled what looked like a mountain of ordinary spreadsheets. To anyone else, it was dull, unremarkable accounting work. But for her, it was a blueprint of the company's hidden skeletons. Offshore accounts, misrouted funds, shell companies, and manipulated transactions. Every error her colleagues had made, every cut corner, every overlooked anomaly, They had assumed she was blind. She wasn't. She saw it all. Meanwhile, the office ran on its usual rituals. Richard Kane, her direct supervisor, prided himself on being intimidating. He barked instructions, assigned last-minute tasks, and took credit for victories. His assistant, Chloe Livingston, flaunted every ounce of her entitlement, expecting compliments and never providing effort. The culture at Summit Harbor was one of performance over reality. Evelyn thrived in the shadows of that performance. Every morning she arrived early, stayed late, and allowed the others to believe she was struggling. She tripped over data entry, apologized to printers, spilled coffee, and muttered small insecurities. They laughed. They pitied her. They called her slow, awkward, and forgetful. Perfect cover. Beneath it, she cataloged their mistakes with the patience of a predator. Every email forwarded, every oversight noted, every phone call saved. Every meeting became a chance to observe who panicked and who tried to shift blame. It was all logged, time-stamped, and encrypted. The weakest moments of her coworkers, the moments they believed she was too timid to notice, were their own undoing waiting to happen. One Friday morning, while Richard Kane ranted about a missing quarterly reconciliation, Evelyn simply smiled behind her glasses. She had already traced the missing funds to a shell company registered under a pseudonym that only she could decipher. While the office erupted in panic, she quietly marked the spreadsheet, added notes, and saved an encrypted copy to her secure drive. And she waited, because patience was key. Evelyn knew the rumors about Vincent Moretti before he even appeared in the building. Billionaire, feared, untouchable. The stories were legendary. Accounts of businessmen who vanished after crossing him, deals turned lethal, and fortunes shifted overnight. Everyone in the office trembled at the thought of him, but Evelyn simply read the signs. The man who entered quietly, yet whose presence changed the air in a room, would notice something others could not. It wasn't fear that guided her, it was strategy. She understood that the very thing the office underestimated, the quiet accountant with perfect memory and meticulous habits, would be the one Vincent Moretti would see first. The only woman who didn't play the pretender, who didn't panic when the money went missing, who didn't flinch at authority or gossip. By the next week, her plan was almost complete. Every microerror, every manipulated ledger, every subtle misdirection in the office hierarchy was logged and backed up in multiple secure locations. Every step of the company's corruption was mapped, and every employee's panic reaction recorded. She had become the spider at the center of a web that nobody else could see, and Vincent Moretti was about to walk right into it. Evelyn Hayes, the dead weight, was no longer invisible. She was essential. And she had waited exactly 5 years for the moment when the world, or at least Summit Harbor Holdings, would finally notice. Because when Vincent Moretti appeared, he wouldn't just see a junior accountant. He would see the only person in the room who knew the truth, and the office would never be the same again. It was Tuesday morning, but the sky outside made it feel like midnight. Rain streaked the glass of Summit Harbor Holdings' 42nd floor, washing the city in gray. The office had settled into its usual rhythm. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, hushed conversations, but all that changed the instant Vincent Moretti walked in. He didn't shout. He didn't demand attention. He just moved through the room with a quiet, terrifying authority. One hand in his pocket, the other resting lightly on a sleek black pistol, he laid down on Evelyn Hayes' desk, as if it belonged there. $36 million gone. And every employee in the accounting department knew it, except they weren't supposed to. That's why they were frozen in place, mid-typing, mid-call, mid-breath. Richard Kane, Evelyn's supervisor, ran toward Vincent like a man trying to catch a bullet with his hands. "Mr. Moretti, please, this isn't the place," he stammered. Sweat gleamed across his forehead, his carefully ironed blue shirt soaked. Not in front of the staff. Vincent didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on Evelyn. 30 pairs of eyes followed his gaze. Everyone knew the target, but only one person seemed unaffected. Evelyn's fingers rested on her keyboard, calm. "You handle the waterfront reconciliations, don't you?" Vincent asked, his voice low and deadly calm. Evelyn blinked slowly behind thick glasses. "I do," she replied, letting a subtle stutter show. Fear makes people careless. She knew it. She had been preparing for this. Richard lunged. "See? She doesn't know anything. She just processes numbers." Vincent leaned down, his shadow swallowing her cubicle. When I said 36 million was missing, everyone else looked terrified. You, however, he paused. You looked irritated. A nervous laugh escaped somewhere behind the desks, swallowed by panicked moments too late. Evelyn lowered her eyes, but inside her heart raced. Not with fear but with anticipation. I have anxiety, she whispered, letting the tremble in her voice mask the steel underneath. Sometimes my face doesn't match what I'm feeling. Vincent studied her. For a long moment he said nothing. The room shrank around them, every employee frozen, realizing this wasn't a simple financial inquiry. It was a reckoning. Finally, Vincent picked up the pistol, sliding it back inside his coat. Richard, you have until midnight to recover my money. Midnight? Richard's knees nearly buckled. 1 minute passed, Vincent continued. I stop asking accountants. Then I start asking the people who look bored. He turned on his heel and left, his overcoat glistening in the rain. The elevator doors closed, and the office finally erupted into whispers, frantic typing and muttered curses. Everyone except Evelyn, who leaned back in her chair and allowed herself the smallest satisfied smile. For 5 years they had called her dead weight. Now Vincent Moretti had just realized why. Evelyn Hayes wasn't just observing. She had been mapping every transaction, every cover-up, every failed attempt to hide funds. She knew exactly where the money went. She had seen how Richard and the other senior accountants moved millions through shell companies, how they falsified reports, how they assumed her ignorance. And now the man with the pistol knew too. The thrill wasn't in the danger. It was in the recognition. The acknowledgement that she, the office underdog, was the only one who hadn't flinched. The only one who saw everything. The only one who could control the outcome. Richard spun toward her, face twisting with panic. What did you do? Evelyn adjusted her glasses, a calm smile on her lips. Nothing, she said softly. I just kept track. And for the first time in that office, power had shifted. Not through fear. Not through shouting. But through competence, patience, and an unshakable calm that everyone, including a billionaire feared for blood and violence, couldn't ignore. By the end of the day, everyone knew who really ran the accounting floor. And no one dared call her dead weight again. After Vincent Moretti left, the office descended into chaos. Phones buzzed, keyboards clattered, and Richard Kane's face twisted with panic. But Evelyn Hayes sat at her desk, calm, composed, and calculating. She had waited for this moment for years, not because she wanted revenge, but because she understood power. And power in her hands meant control of the narrative. Evelyn spent the next several days quietly gathering everything she could. Every spreadsheet, every email, every financial record that had been rerouted, manipulated, or hidden. She cataloged every irregularity with timestamps, highlighting who approved it, who ignored it, and who had been complicit. Each note was precise, methodical, and impossible to dispute. She didn't confront anyone. She didn't whisper warnings. She let the chaos around her continue. Richard berated staff. Chloe flaunted her ignorance. Every misstep was being quietly logged, every reaction stored for later use. In addition to the files, Evelyn began recording conversations. Microphones hidden behind bookshelves, under cubicle partitions, and inside pens ensured that any offhand comment about the missing funds, company fraud, or corporate favoritism would be captured. Even casual complaints from Richard or snide remarks from Chloe were preserved. The brilliance of her plan was simple. She wasn't trying to catch people in the act in the moment, they were already exposed. She was building an unassailable case. The combination of her meticulous spreadsheets, hidden recordings, and internal documentation would leave no room for deniability. Then came Jessica. Vincent's assistant had mentioned the name while discussing past financial anomalies. Evelyn dug deeper and discovered Jessica Moretti, a former fiancée of Vincent's cousin. The story was murky, but it confirmed one thing. The Moretti family had a long history of coercion, intimidation, and financial control. Jessica had fled before things escalated, but she confirmed the patterns Evelyn had already observed: manipulation disguised as mentorship, control disguised as kindness, and absolute dominance over anyone they considered weak. With Jessica's account, Evelyn knew she had validation beyond her own files. She had corroboration from someone who had lived through the same manipulation. Every piece of her evidence now had context. Every spreadsheet, every email, every recorded comment told the same story. Summit Harbor Holdings had been run like a machine built on intimidation, and Evelyn was the only one who had not been broken. Her next step was timing. She couldn't reveal the evidence immediately. It had to be public, and it had to be in front of people who mattered. The annual Summit Harbor Gala was approaching. A night where city officials, corporate sponsors, and journalists would all be present. It was the perfect stage. Evelyn smiled quietly at the thought. They believed she was a timid, awkward accountant. They thought she would panic, stumble, and obey. But when the night arrived, she would control the room without raising her voice. Her patience had prepared her for this exact moment. She worked late into the evenings, double-checking her files, encrypting her data, and rehearsing every possible scenario. She ensured that each piece of evidence was organized, time-stamped, and ready to be sent securely to trusted recipients at the gala. Nothing could go wrong if she maintained her composure. For the first time, Evelyn felt a surge of exhilaration. Not fear, not anxiety, not anger. She felt anticipation. This wasn't just about money or exposure. This was about justice. The people who had underestimated her for years, who had mocked her and assumed she was incompetent, were about to learn what happens when you ignore the person you consider invisible. And as she shut down her laptop each night, she whispered to herself, "This is the moment I've been waiting for. They will see me. All of them." The stage was set. The pieces were in place. And when the gala lights shone on Summit Harbor Holdings' glittering ballroom, Evelyn Hayes, the woman they called dead weight, would finally step out of the shadows, and no one in that room would ever forget her. The annual Summit Harbor Foundation Gala was where rich people came to convince each other they were good people. Crystal chandeliers, $500 dinner plates, champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and enough fake smiles to power the entire city of Chicago. Every year, the event raised millions for charities. Every year, local politicians, business leaders, and media personalities showed up. Every year, Richard Kane stood on stage and talked about integrity. This year would be different, because this year integrity had receipts. Evelyn arrived alone. Nobody stopped her. Nobody questioned her invitation. Why would they? She was invisible. Just an accountant. Just dead weight. Just cubicle 47. The woman nobody noticed. The woman everyone underestimated. Exactly the way she liked it. The ballroom glittered with wealth. Richard Kane stood near the stage laughing with investors. Chloe Livingston was already 3 glasses into the evening, posting selfies online with captions about women in leadership. Evelyn almost laughed. The irony was exhausting. Around them, journalists moved between tables. Board members shook hands. Donors exchanged business cards. Everyone celebrated the success of Summit Harbor Holdings, a company built on fraud, a foundation built on stolen money, a reputation built on lies. At exactly 7:43 p.m., Evelyn received a text. One word. Ready. It came from Vincent Moretti. For the first time all evening, she smiled. 3 days earlier, Vincent had invited her to his private office. It wasn't really an office. It looked more like a war room. Screens everywhere. Maps. Financial reports. Security monitors. Men who looked capable of breaking bones while discussing quarterly earnings. Vincent sat behind a black desk. "You're not what I expected." Evelyn adjusted her glasses. "Neither are you." That made him laugh. The first genuine laugh she'd heard from him. "You know where the money went." It wasn't a question. "No." His eyebrow lifted. "I know where all of it went." Silence. Then Vincent smiled. A dangerous smile. The kind predators reserve for other predators. For the first time someone saw her. Not the cardigan. Not the stutter. Not the awkwardness. Her. The real her. And Vincent Moretti immediately understood something everyone else had missed. Evelyn Hayes wasn't weak. She was patient. Now standing inside the gala ballroom, she checked the time. 7:58 p.m. 2 minutes. Richard stepped onto the stage. Applause filled the room. The spotlight found him instantly. Confident. Relaxed. Smiling. He looked like a man who believed he had already won. "Good evening, everyone." More applause. He launched into his prepared speech. Community, integrity, trust, leadership, the usual corporate fairy tales. At table 12, Evelyn quietly opened her phone. Then she pressed a single button. The first notification appeared on a board member's phone. Then another. Then 50 more. Every major donor, every journalist, every executive, every member of the board received the same email. Subject line: confidential financial evidence. Attached: fraud reports, shell company transfers, hidden accounts, recorded conversations, internal documents, video evidence, 5 years of receipts. Richard kept talking, still smiling, still unaware, until the first journalist stood up. Then a second, then a third. People weren't listening anymore. They were staring at their phones, faces changing, confusion, shock, disbelief, horror. Richard finally noticed what seems to be his phone buzzed. He looked down, and his entire face drained white. The room went silent. Not polite silence, funeral silence. A reporter raised his hand. Mr. Kane. Richard froze. Can you explain why company funds were routed through 7 shell corporations? Gasps, whispers, phones lifted, cameras activated. Another voice. Is this your signature approving the transfers? More whispers, more cameras. Then came the final blow. The audio recording, the one Evelyn had saved for months. Richard's voice echoed through the ballroom speakers. Clear, undeniable, perfect. Nobody pays attention to Evelyn. She's too stupid to understand what she's seeing. The room exploded. Journalists rushed forward. Board members stood up. Donors began leaving. Investors started making phone calls. One sponsor literally walked out before dessert. Richard looked like a man watching his house burn while holding the matches. He scanned the room desperately, looking for someone to blame, looking for an escape, looking for Evelyn. When he found her, she was still sitting calmly at table 12, sipping sparkling water, watching, the same way she'd watched for 5 years. You did this. His voice cracked. Evelyn nodded. No. Richard blinked. What? I documented it. The room got even quieter. You stole the money. She stood. For the first time all evening, all eyes followed her. Not Richard. Not the executives. Not the billionaires. Her. You lied. Step. You manipulated financial reports. Step. You used company funds. Step. You blamed employees. Step. You assumed nobody was paying attention. Final step. And you were wrong. Nobody interrupted. Nobody defended him. Because every single person in the room had already read the evidence. Richard's knees actually buckled. Not metaphorically. Literally. He grabbed a table to stay upright. The mighty executive. The untouchable partner. The man who had spent 5 years humiliating her. Reduced to a frightened old fraud in front of 500 witnesses. Then the ballroom doors opened. Federal agents walked in. 10 of them. Dark jackets. Badges visible. Expressions cold. The lead investigator approached Richard. Richard Kane. Silence. You are being investigated for fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and financial misconduct. The handcuffs clicked. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody helped him. As Richard was escorted away, he turned one final time, looking directly at Evelyn. Hatred, fear, regret, all mixed together. Evelyn simply smiled. Not cruelly, not triumphantly, just calmly, because justice wasn't revenge. Justice was documentation, and nobody documented better than her. Across the room, Vincent Moretti raised his glass. A silent toast. Respect. Recognition. Victory. 5 years earlier they had called her dead weight. Tonight, everyone finally learned the truth. Evelyn Hayes hadn't been slowing the company down. She had been the only thing holding it together. And this was only the beginning. The morning after the gala, Summit Harbor Holdings felt like a different place. The walls seemed thinner. The elevators moved slower. Phones buzzed incessantly. Richard Kane had been suspended pending investigation. His office stripped of privileges, the board scrambling to contain what had just happened. Chloe Livingston had gone missing from the office entirely, her social media flooded with messages from clients, reporters, and employees all demanding accountability. Evelyn Hayes walked through the 42nd floor as if it were her own. In truth, it already was. Every terminal she passed displayed emails she had sent the night before, each carefully worded to expose corruption while preserving the legal boundaries. Employees avoided her eyes, whispers following her like a trail of smoke. They remembered calling her dead weight, mocking her, laughing at her desk. Now those whispers carried fear and respect. Vincent Moretti was the only person who didn't flinch. He had watched the gala unfold from a private suite. His eyes tracked her across the floor. The calm, composed woman that had walked in alone and invisible was the same woman who orchestrated a public takedown of one of the wealthiest, most untouchable companies in Chicago. He had learned more about her in a single evening than most managers did in decades. By mid-morning, Evelyn was summoned to the boardroom. The air was tense. Former colleagues, panicked accountants, and a handful of lawyers sat around the massive mahogany table. Papers were scattered everywhere. Phones recording the fallout. Security footage from the gala looped silently on the projector screen. Vincent stood at the head, his presence as commanding as ever. "Miss Hayes," he said, voice calm, but with an edge that sent shivers through the room, "I think you've earned a proper introduction." Evelyn straightened her back, letting her calm aura fill the room. "I'm not here to introduce myself," she said softly. "I'm here to finalize what should have been done years ago. Accountability." Gasps and murmurs circulated. People who had spent years underestimating her finally recognized the gravity of the situation. The evidence, the meticulous spreadsheets, the recordings, and the corroborations were unassailable. One by one, the executives who had once sneered at her, dismissed her, and laughed at her clumsy mistakes, were called to answer. Contracts were voided. Funds were frozen. Employees who had actively participated in the manipulation faced immediate investigations. Chloe Livingston, frantic and pale, finally appeared in the boardroom. She had been summoned after multiple emails pinged her phone continuously. "Evelyn," she began. "Chloe," Evelyn interrupted, her voice calm but unmistakably commanding. "Every file you handled, every approval you signed, every oversight you ignored has been documented. You will cooperate fully, or this will be made public." Chloe's mouth opened then closed. Words failed her. The girl who had mocked her for years, the one who had believed she could intimidate and manipulate, now realized she was powerless. Richard Kane was next. Sweat soaked his shirt, and his face had a permanent shade of pale blue. "This isn't fair," he started. "Fair?" Evelyn asked. "Fair has nothing to do with this. Accuracy, accountability, and truth do. And you failed at all three." Vincent Moretti leaned back, watching with approval. "Miss Hayes," he said, "you've demonstrated a skill set that this company desperately needed. I want to offer you the role of Chief Operating Officer. You will have full authority to restructure the company and implement controls. You've earned this." Evelyn's lips curved slightly. She had waited years for the moment when her diligence, intelligence, and patience would be recognized. Not for fame, not for glory, but for justice and competence. She nodded. "I accept," she said. "Under one condition. Every single person who attempted to manipulate the company, the finances, or me, will be held accountable to the fullest extent." Vincent smiled. Done. By the end of the day, Summit Harbor Holdings had transformed. Dead weight became indispensable. Fear turned to respect. Whispers of mockery became cautious acknowledgments. And Evelyn Hayes, the woman they had all underestimated, became the fulcrum of control. She stood by the window, overlooking the Chicago skyline. Rain still fell in silver streaks. The city felt alive beneath her, bustling, chaotic, yet under her gaze somehow contained. She had endured years of derision, invisibility, and silent cruelty. And now she was not just seen. She was recognized, respected, and unstoppable. The office that had laughed at her, sneered at her, and called her useless had learned the hard truth. You never underestimate the person who quietly keeps everyone's receipts. And for the first time Evelyn smiled, not for revenge, not for power, but for clarity, justice, and finally absolute control. 3 months later, nobody at Summit Harbor Holdings used the nickname anymore. Deadweight. The phrase had vanished from the building like a disease finally cured. Funny how that worked. People only call you useless until they discover you've been carrying everything. The federal investigation expanded quickly, much faster than anyone expected. Once agents started digging through the records Evelyn had preserved, they found more than missing money. A lot more. Fraud, tax evasion, kickback schemes, fake consulting contracts, hidden offshore accounts, years of corruption, years of theft, years of people assuming nobody would ever notice, because nobody had. Except Evelyn. Richard Kane accepted a plea deal before Christmas. The newspapers called him the mastermind. The prosecutors called him cooperative. Evelyn called him predictable. Men like Richard always believed they were the smartest person in the room, until evidence introduced them to reality. His sentence became front-page news. The same executives who once laughed at Evelyn suddenly claimed they had always respected her. That part made her laugh the hardest. Chloe Livingston didn't fare much better. 3 major companies withdrew job offers. 2 universities revoked advisory positions. Her social media following disappeared almost overnight. Turns out people loved confidence. They just hated arrogance, especially when it came attached to fraud. For weeks she tried to blame everyone else. Richard, the board, the accountants. Eventually even her own lawyer told her to stop talking. The boardroom looked very different now. The old executives were gone. New faces occupied the seats. Real auditors. Real compliance officers. Real professionals. People who cared more about numbers than appearances. Exactly the way Evelyn preferred it. Her office was on the 47th floor now. Corner suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A view of downtown Chicago that stretched for miles. The office once belonged to Richard. She kept almost nothing from his design. New desk. New furniture. New artwork. New beginning. The only thing she kept was a framed copy of her first employee badge. Cubicle 47. The photograph was terrible. The glasses looked enormous. The cardigan looked even worse. But she loved it, because it reminded her of something important. Never forget where they underestimated you. One snowy afternoon, Vincent Moretti stopped by her office. No security team. No lawyers. No assistants. Just Vincent. Which somehow felt stranger than the entourage. He stood near the window looking down at the city. You know what fascinates me? Evelyn glanced up from her laptop. What? You could have exposed them years ago. She smiled. I know. So why didn't you? The answer came easily. Because she'd spent years thinking about it. Because she'd lived it. Because she understood something most powerful people never learned. Timing. Vincent nodded slowly. Most people want revenge. I never wanted revenge. No. She shook her head. I wanted certainty. That made him smile. Because he understood. Men like Vincent built empires on timing. Women like Evelyn destroyed corruption with it. The media kept trying to turn her into a celebrity. She hated it. Interviews. Podcasts. Business magazines. Everyone wanted the same story. The overlooked accountant. The secret genius. The woman who exposed millions in fraud. The billionaire who trusted her. The empire she helped rebuild. The headlines got more ridiculous every week. One magazine called her the most dangerous woman in corporate America. Vincent framed that one. She threatened to quit. He laughed for 10 straight minutes. The funny thing was, almost nothing about Evelyn actually changed. She still arrived before sunrise. Still preferred spreadsheets to meetings. Still ate lunch alone most days. Still wore cardigans. Better cardigans now. But cardigans nonetheless. The difference wasn't her. The difference was everyone else. They finally saw what had always been there. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, Evelyn walked through the accounting department. The same department. The same floor. The same rows of desks. Only quieter. Cleaner. Healthier. No whispers. No bullying. No office politics. No predators. Just work. The way it should have been. She paused beside an empty cubicle. Cubicle 47. Someone new worked there now. A young woman fresh out of college. Shy. nervous, always apologizing. The similarities weren't lost on Evelyn. Earlier that week she'd overheard two employees making fun of the girl. The conversation ended quickly. Not because Evelyn threatened them, because nobody wanted to become the next cautionary tale. Culture changes when accountability arrives. As she stood there, her phone buzzed. A news alert. Another article. Another headline. Another reminder of everything that had happened. She looked at it for a moment, then deleted the notification without reading it. The story no longer belonged to the media. It belonged to her. And she already knew how it ended. That night, standing alone beside the window of her office, Evelyn watched snow fall across the Chicago skyline. Thousands of lights sparkled below. The city moved on. It always did. People forgot scandals. Companies recovered. Headlines faded. But lessons remained. And the biggest lesson of all? The people who talk the loudest are rarely the ones you should fear. It's the quiet ones. The observers. The note-takers. The people everyone overlooks. The people who keep receipts. 5 years earlier they called her dead weight. They laughed when she entered a room. Ignored her in meetings. Talked over her. Dismissed her. Used her. Underestimated her. Then one billionaire asked a simple question. Where did the money go? And suddenly the woman nobody noticed became the most important person in the building. Evelyn smiled at the city below, turned off the office lights, and walked out, leaving behind a company that finally worked. A reputation she had earned, and a lesson nobody who knew her would ever forget. Because sometimes the strongest person in the room isn't the loudest. Sometimes she's the one quietly keeping everyone's receipts.